This morning I'd like to talk about Jesus as the gentle servant. There in Romans 8 verse 29 talks about God before he had even created anything, that he looked forward and saw the disciples of his Son. He saw those whom he would gather into that eternal home that we've been singing about this morning. But he predestined them. That means just a long time ago, he gave them a destiny. Understand, as a Christian, you have a destiny. And it's not just heaven. It's actually to be like Jesus Christ. It is to conform to his image. Now, that word to conform here to his image actually means to have a similar form, shape, have a similar nature, or have a similar style. And one of the things that we see about his apostles and the disciples that first began to follow him while he was in the flesh is that after he had died and after he had been resurrected, that he opened up to them their minds and their understanding of Scripture and understood now why he had to die, why he had to ascend into heaven. And they went out and in a short order began to be like him. In fact, as I mentioned in a verse last week, really early on in the church, when the oppression begins to come down upon the apostles, and they are preaching Jesus, that he is the Messiah, he is the Christ, and the leaders of the nation are upset because what's being said about them is they have killed the Messiah. And they threaten them, they beat them. Well, they leave. Well, one of the things they notice, Peter and John, is that seeing them talk and seeing their boldness, these guys have been with Jesus. So here was Peter, and John. We see most of the apostles, in fact, were not men who had gone and studied at the feet of a rabbi. These were men who, probably in their teens were learning, maybe even younger than that, were learning how to fish or learning how to farm. Or in Matthew/Luke's case, learning how to collect taxes. But all of them changed. They were conformed. They were transformed to be like him, so that they became like him. But it wasn't just for the apostles to do that. You and I, as Christians, are called to transform ourselves into his image. Now, I think all of us probably have an image of Jesus. I think everybody who comes to him, who is raised up in new life with him, sees something in Jesus that they are attracted to. And I think that it probably appeals to us even before we're Christians, before we really have any kind of wisdom. And it may be his truthful nature. It may be his gentle nature. It may be his confronting powerful leaders and hypocrites. I don't know what it is, but I think all of us have something that we probably see it about him that we're all attracted to, that we all like. And we would all probably, from the very beginning, like to be like that. I think what we don't have, though, early on, and even for lots of our lives in Christ, is a full picture of who he is. All of those different things brought together into somebody who can be gentle and truthful, graceful and correcting and rebuking. And it's hard to do all of those things. I don't think any of us find it easy to be all that Jesus was. I don't know that the apostles even found it easy to be all that he was. So that even Paul, when we look in the Scriptures, we probably know more about the Apostle Paul in a lot of ways just because we see so much of his failures and successes and so much that he writes about himself. But he himself talked about having to continue to put off the self, to put on Christ, to the point that it can become Christ living in me. But he never felt like, at least he doesn't write, that that has fully happened. So it is a process for all of us, no matter where we are in our understanding of God, no matter where we are in our trust of God, whether we are new and babes, whether we are mature, we have to keep conforming, transforming into the image of His Son. And so this morning I want to talk about a couple of the images about Him. And that is the gentleness and His service. With in Isaiah 42, in the first 4 verses there. So if you have a Bible, in Isaiah 42, 1 through 4. I just want to notice the first 3 verses. Behold my servant. What that means is look at him. He is going to give us an image. In fact, all through the prophets, one of the things that you notice when you look at a Bible, or if you even have it on your tablet or your phone, you'll notice that they haven't put all the words from the left margin all the way to the right margin. That they've only put a little phrase and then they indented and put another little phrase. And this is poetry. And poetry normally has images in it. That is trying to get us to see something, to learn something, but by picturing it. And so he is trying to get us to picture something. And here in Isaiah 42, the prophet Isaiah was, for the Jews long ago, giving them an image of the servant that God was going to send to save them. But he's saying, so look at him. I want you to look at my servant. So the very first thing I want to notice, though, is what does it mean to be a servant? When you look at somebody and you see what somebody is like, is there a difference between somebody who is the master and somebody who is the servant? You ever notice that some people, maybe whether they have money, whether they have power, whether they have prestige, position, they carry themselves like people whom they can kind of just say, I want this done, and it gets done. They can make a call. You ever know anybody like that? I just got to make a call, and I can make it happen. There are people like that. I don't know if you know a lot of them, you've been around a lot of them, but there are people, and they walk around knowing, I can just make a call, and it will get done. Or heads will roll. People will get fired. People will get sued. Things will happen. But there are other people who don't walk around like that at all, do they? Who walk around like they're humble, they're lowly, they are just here to help and to serve. And he's telling us from the very beginning, one of the things about Jesus is that he didn't have that air about him as he walked around in the flesh, that people went, oh, there is the most powerful human being on the planet. Now he said when he was arrested, he could have called 10,000 legions of angels. That's a massive number, by the way, more than 10,000. He could have called massive numbers. And one angel killed 185,000 troops one time. In one night. The power, the authority that he had over everything is beyond measure. his power would dwarf the combined wealth and power of Jeff Bezos of Amazon, of Zuckerberg of Facebook, and think about the wealthiest people in the world. They could, and all of them in this world can just make a call. They can make a call to politicians probably, who probably do what they say. There are hedge fund managers that make calls to politicians that none of us even know. But Jesus was more powerful than all of them combined, and has more wealth and more to give us than all of them combined. And yet he walked around like a carpenter's son who learned how to work with wood. He was a servant. He came to serve. And that's one of the things that I think all of us need to really learn from. Regardless of position that we might attain or not attain in life, we need to have that mentality. One of the things that scriptures tell us is that if we're poor in this world, we should have the mindset that we're rich. He tells us we need to think we're rich because he has made us rich. Because he doesn't want us to get overwhelmed by the temptations or the attitude of being poor. But then he says to the rich person, the person who has all kinds of stuff and goods in this world, he says, you've got to think like you're poor. Don't let the temptations of having power, of having prestige, of having wealth, make you think you're more than you are. That's a temptation as well. Don't let that happen. We need to have an understanding that all of us are servants, just like he was, to become like him. And he says, I want you to behold my servant whom I uphold, my chosen in whom my soul delights. How often do you think the chosen one, how often you're the chosen one? Remember, it was kind of a joke. For those of you who watched the Harry Potter movies or read the books, for a while, in one of them, he's like, "Oh yeah, I am the chosen one." He realized that he's the chosen one, and he's kind of like most kids would act if they think they're the chosen one. They're like, "Hey, I'm pretty good. Look how great I am," and his friends kind of knock him down a peg and say, "Listen, stop that." Because that's what most of us would do if we're the chosen one, right? If we're the chosen, and are we the chosen, by the way, as Christians? Yeah. We are a chosen people. His own special people. Called to be great and mighty and servants. And so, we're chosen like he was. And he says, in whom my soul delights. We could kind of go off into that area for a long time, not going to. But just, does God delight in us? Now, I want you to stop, because a lot of us at this point, if you were to ask the question, does God delight in us? We would look at ourselves and go, well, have I done all the right stuff? Have I been perfect? I haven't been perfect, so God's not that happy with me. And I think that's an inappropriate way to visualize this. Do you delight in your children or your grandchildren in spite of their flaws? Because I got to tell you, James is pretty cool, but he's also pretty annoying to me almost every Sunday. But you still delight in him. He annoys them, I bet, more than me. It's only once a week for me. And he'll get over that, I know that, but they delight in him. We delight in our children regardless of their flaws. God delights in us when we are his children. When we are his and his chosen, his soul is delighted by that. He says, I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He's going to bring justice. He's just. Justice is kind of a hard thing to find in the world, isn't it? We try to get it, but do we think that justice is equally available to everybody? Do we think that the court system in our country is equally just whether you are rich and powerful or whether you're poor with nothing? Now, I think we will probably believe it would like to be. It would try to be. But what happens? More money allows to buy more abilities and more time and better lawyers, make better arguments, and justice doesn't always happen. But God's always just. His servant is always just. He's always giving everybody the proper recompense for what they've done. Now, is that wonderful? Have you ever been? Does anybody here? Anybody here admit they were the favored child? I see quite a few heads nodding. A lot of people believe they're the favored one. What if you weren't the favored one and it was just for everybody? See, for the favored one, justice isn't so great. You're kind of losing out. They're going to get just as much as me. I'm not going to get preferential treatment anymore. For those who don't get the preferential treatment, who aren't the favored one, now that's great for you, isn't it? But that's what God is. That's what He is. That's why He could have. Think about who are the apostles that Jesus was closest to. So He has 12 of them He chose. We know one cut off because of his sin, but Peter, James, and John. And Peter had a brother, but he wasn't as close to Peter's brother as Andrew is he was to Peter. So he took and he actually revealed to them things that the others didn't get to see. You think the other 9 felt a little, well, he likes them better than me. He probably did. He was probably closer to them. They were more like friends to him than maybe some of the others were. The others were there to learn and do their job, but maybe not as close. And yet one of those he was closest to, when he tempted Jesus to not go through to the cross, he called him Satan. When Peter was tempting him, "Get behind me, Satan." So his closest friend amongst all of his apostles, he says, "Listen, I'll put you behind me as easily as anybody else." Now, he goes on and he says, "He will not cry aloud or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street." Now, what does that mean? He's not loud. How many people, some of us are probably loud by nature, right? So this characteristic of Jesus might be a little more difficult for some of us, to be less loud. Some of us, it might fit kind of already like that. But for all of us, we're called to be not loud, not, big deal. Now, how many people who are rich and powerful like to throw their weight around? They like to let everybody know. Lots of people. Very common characteristic of those who are rich or powerful. To be loud. And to think they should have the loudest voice because they have the most money or they have the biggest brain. So Jesus came with more wisdom, more power, more riches, with a soft, quiet voice. And that, by the way, reminds me of the image of helping Moses see that he wasn't in the earthquake, he wasn't in the lightning, he was in that really quiet little voice afterwards. That's where God was found. When he hit him in the rock as he passed by and showed him all those things. That sometimes we think God big and powerful and scary, but God is gentle and quiet by his nature. And so he says, a bruised reed he will not break, and a faintly burning wick he will not quench. He will faithfully bring forth justice. Now I want you to think about verse 3 when he's talking about a bruised reed. And I think he's obviously referring to people that are damaged. Even they're almost out. I mean, their faith, it's like that wick, that candle that is burned down, and maybe so much wax is kind of gathered around the base of the wick that the wick is just kind of a glowing ember on the tip. And Jesus isn't one of those, that's not doing anything. How good is a glowing ember on the tip of a candle when you actually have a candle lit for a purpose? Like, well, that doesn't do any good. People are like, just put that out. He doesn't just put that out. He's going to help that to just keep glowing. Now, he says he will not grow faint or be discouraged till he has established justice in the earth, and the coastlands wait for his law. By the way, in the book of Isaiah, the coastlands is a reference for the peoples who live outside of Israel. So he's referring really to all the rest of the world that's not Israel. He says, I'm going to bring justice everywhere, to everybody. And I'm not going to stop, and I'm not going to get tired, and I'm not going to quit until I brought it everywhere. And so, and we can think about all these things. Are we told to not grow weary, not get tired, and not get faint, not get discouraged? Yeah, don't stop. Got to persevere, got to keep going. Those are things we have to learn to do just like he did. It can be tiring, it can be difficult. He had his moments where he was weeping, wasn't he? He had his moments when he's like, this is hard, but I'm going to press on. He was a servant with a quiet and gentle spirit who was never going to give up. Because sometimes, what do we think about people who are really quiet and really gentle? We think of them as weak sometimes, don't we? We believe weakness and gentleness kind of go hand in hand. It's what we think about a lot of times. In fact, it's not true. Lots of gentle, quiet people, and Jesus is the best example of that, are stronger than any of us. And some of the times, the people who are loudest and brashest are sometimes the weakest people. He says, we can be strong and still be gentle. We can persevere and keep going and still be quiet. And have that quiet, gentle spirit that Paul even writes in the New Testament to make it our aim to be like that. So let's look at a passage here and kind of show where we see this kind of happening for us. Matthew chapter 12, start in verse 9. So in the face of opposition here, but he carried on. He was quiet about it. He just continued to do good. It says in verse 9, he went from there and entered their synagogue. Now the people he's already begun healing people on the Sabbath. And some people are believing, or they're accusing him of breaking the law, of working on the Sabbath. And so he goes from there into a synagogue, and a man there with a withered hand, so his hand's not working. And they asked him, so they're talking to Jesus, the people, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So now I don't know if they brought the man there, if he's normally there, but Jesus is there, they're there, guy with a withered hand is there, and they go, hey, can you heal him on the Sabbath? Is it lawful to heal him on the Sabbath? And so that they might accuse him. So they did this. They're just trying to find, look, he's a lawbreaker. It's a setup. They're trying to set him up. He said to them, which one of you has a sheep? If it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not take hold of it and lift it out. Do you think anybody in there, if their sheep had fallen into a pit on the Sabbath day, wouldn't have lifted it out? Would we define that as work to save that animal's life? No. They're playing word games, is what they're doing. They're almost acting like he's being a doctor. There were, by the way, exceptions to the Sabbath rule of working. I don't know if all of us are always aware of that. There were because who worked on the Sabbath all the time? The priests. You have to understand, one of the things that they often overlooked was God's purpose for the Sabbath. He himself, Jesus taught even at times, the purpose for the Sabbath, this was something for you to stop and you to think about God and you to not get all caught up with every single day of every week trying to just get more and more and more and work harder and harder and harder. He says, take time to stop. But he says, of how much more value is a man than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Now notice he changed the word. He didn't say it's lawful to heal on Sabbath. He said it's lawful to do good. Because what he's doing is he was extrapolating it out. It isn't just about healing this guy's hand. You also, he was telling these Jews, you can do good to people on the Sabbath day. You can help them. God didn't give you any commandments about not being helpful and good to people on the Sabbath day. It's like, walking along, somebody has, been beaten and lying on the side of the street. Oh, it's a Sabbath day, can't do anything. Would they have done that? I hope not, but he's telling him that you're not understanding the Sabbath Act correctly. So it is lawful to go on the Sabbath, he said. Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand, and the man stretched out, and it was restored, healthy like the other. So notice, they were setting him up, he did it anyway. He knew they were just trying to get him to heal the guy on the Sabbath, and then they could accuse him. And so their response when he did it, the Pharisees went out and conspired against him how to destroy him. We got to kill this guy. Look at that, man. He healed that guy. How awful is that? Something wrong, obviously, with the people, right? Something's going on with those who hate him. Satan is at work in them. They may not fully grasp that, but that's what was happening. So Jesus, being aware of this, he withdrew from there. And many followed him, and he healed them all and ordered them not to make him known. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. Behold my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved with whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him. He will proclaim justice to the Gentiles. He will not quarrel or cry aloud, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, a smoldering wick he will not quench, until he brings justice to victory, and in his name the Gentiles will hope. That's what I just read, isn't it? He basically is like, I'm not here to make a big deal about me. I'm helping you. I'm doing good to you. Go ahead and be quiet about it. Don't say anything. Now, in John 13, he actually gives his apostles, right before he was to be arrested, he gave them a lesson of washing feet. And I think a lot of us are probably familiar with John 13 and the Jesus washing of feet. There have been, this is really kind of funny in a sad way, there have been people trying to follow Christ who have argued about that we need to really literally wash everybody's feet, and not only just need to do that, but we have argued about which foot to wash first. You think they might have had their trajectory and the point might be quite a ways apart. One of the things that he told is when he kind of sat down with them, So before the feast of the Passover, he knew it was his hour to come, to depart. He's like, he was ready. He knew just this is the night. I'm going to be leaving them. And so he loved them who were in the world. He loved his own. He loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, he told him, go do what you're going to do. But he took them all, and he said, he rose from supper, he laid aside his outer garments, took a towel, tied it around his waist. He poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand. Peter said, you will never wash my feet. Now what's interesting about this is he's already washed a bunch of other disciples' feet. They didn't say anything, apparently. It happened, he's doing it. And he comes to Peter, and Peter's the one that actually kind of instigates the teaching, by the way. You're like, I'm not going to have you wash my feet. Why did Peter not want him to wash his feet? My suspicion is, based on what he says here, is like that, no, you're the master. We shouldn't be having the master get down on his knees and washing our feet. We're the servants. We're the followers. You're the master. No, you've got to be lifted up. This is too low for you. And so he's like, no, part of me suspects that Peter, what was he thinking as he watched the other guys get their feet washed? I can't believe they're letting them do that. Why aren't they refusing? So he comes to him, he's refusing. And Jesus actually says to him when when Peter said, you will never wash my feet, Jesus said, if I do not wash you, you have no share with me. Well, that kind of shook Peter up. Whoa, I'm cut off if I don't let you wash my feet. Think about that statement. You have no part with me. That means you're cut off. And Peter says at that point, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Wash all of me then. Now he's obviously not talking about, have a full-on bath, but my hand, there you go, wash my hands too. Wash my head too. He's like, I don't need to wash your hand and your head. And he goes on to tell him. He says, the one who has bathed does not need to wash except for his feet. Now, we may not grasp this very well because most of us walk around in closed shoes, especially if we're out walking on, hiking out in camping or whatever. And most of us wear closed-toed shoes. We don't get a lot of dust and sweat and dirt on our feet. But they walk around, all of them, mostly on dirt paths. See, I knew he wouldn't let me down. They walk around on dirt paths in open-toed sandals. Even no matter how clean they were, what was going to happen to their feet? They were going to be dirty. It's just like when your kids are little and they're running around with bare feet all the time. You ever get that feeling after they might have just been running around on the carpet? And then you look at the bottom of their feet, and you're going, what's on my carpets? That's what happens to your feet when you don't have shoes on. And they didn't. They had sandals. And so he's like, I'm just here. I'm just going to wash your feet. You're already clean. You're already bathed. You're already washed. I'm just going to wash your feet. I'm going to clean up this dirt right here. But he says, you don't understand what I'm doing right now. Now, what he was doing to them was actually a fairly common thing. For households that had servants, it was normal to have a servant wash people who entered their feet. In fact, Jesus makes a point to this in some other places, that he had gone into somebody's house when the woman who was crying on his feet and wiping his feet down with her hair, and she was a sinful woman, and the guy whose house Jesus is in is like, I can't believe he's letting that woman touch him. And he's like, I came into your house, you didn't wash my feet, and didn't even offer me water and a towel to do it myself. And she has taken her own tears and her own hair to wash my feet. And so they were used to they were familiar with washing the feet. Common practice for them. But they didn't really get his message yet. They would, but not yet. And so Jesus said, the one who has he says, the one who has bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you. For he knew who was to betray him. That was why he said, not all of you are clean. When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. Now I want you to stop and think, if you took out the little section with Peter refusing, do you know the early part of this and the latter part of this is that Jesus, after the supper, simply got up, took off his coat, laid it aside, grabbed a basin of water, a towel, put it around him, and then just started washing their feet. He didn't tell them anything. He didn't say anything. They're just sitting there, and he started washing their feet. And without Peter's little, excerpt in there, he would have finished washing everybody's feet and come down and said, you know what I just did? Do you understand? Now, if the answer had been, they would have probably been like every other person, every other student in a teacher's class, when you know that the question the teacher just asked is a trick question. You don't want to answer it. And so you sit there quietly and, I'm not answering, I'm not saying anything. So he said, do you know what I've done? You call me teacher and Lord, you're right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Basically what he's telling us, don't act like you're better than me. And if I'm willing to do this for you, you have to be willing to do this for others. And, I think you see that in all of the apostles, their willingness to serve and to do things for other people. And Jesus taking this lesson, learning this lesson, that they too, ultimately all of them, be killed for their faith. But he, giving them this lesson, he says, you got to be saved. Now think about it. It wasn't long before this, by the way, that some of them were arguing about I'm going to be better than you. No, I'm going to be better than you. And then James and John, sons of thunder, go get their mom and say, Mom, go tell him we should be the ones on his right and left hand. We should be number one and number two of all these guys. We're better than the rest of these guys. That's what these guys were doing. This is the opposite of that. They were trying to see who could be greater, who could be more powerful. He says, you've got to stop that. You've got to change the way people typically think when they have authority and when they have any kind of position or power. Because what did God make us as a chosen people? A royal priesthood. What's that make us? Princes and priests. Well, what did most of the princes and priests do in the Old Testament? They acted like everybody was there to serve them. And they abused people. And they took advantage of people. And he was there to say, not so for us. We're here to serve people. In Matthew 25, think about what serving really means. I think one of the time when we talk about service, a lot of times we get it in our head, and I remember as a newer Christian kind of thinking the same thing. Man, in order to really serve, I've got to, I got to teach. I've got to lead singing. I've got to lead prayers. He's like, that's not, by the way, really anything. Those are things you can do. Those aren't the things Jesus points to. So you go back to Matthew 25, He says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and he talks about judgment. He's given us a vision of judgment, Jesus is. He says, listen, when I have come in my glory and all the angels are with him, he will sit in his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations. He will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He says, again, the sheep, he says, we're going to place on the right, the goats on the left. He says, the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. And he says, and how do we know the sheep? How do we know these from those? You know, have you ever heard this argument about sitting on the right hand, left end of the building? It's like, which is the right and left? It's a joke. It's this side. Because it's not from your perspective, is it? It's from his perspective. But he says, all of you over here. What made you different from all of you over here? What did you do? What was this great service that you did? He says, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. And then the righteous will answer him saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? He's like, when did we ever do this to you? And he says, when did you see, coming down, it says, the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. Now, I think he is probably very explicitly talking about, you see all of his family, but he has told us, as scriptures teach us, it isn't just, we're not just here to do good to those who are part of our family, but especially to our family in Christ, but to everybody. Everybody is an offspring of God. And what he's saying is, when there is a need, and I have the ability to fill that need, I should try to fill that need. If I have the ability to help, and there's somebody who can use it, then I should do it. I think one of the things that religion sometimes gets caught up with is we've got to set up programs to find people in need so that some people can help. But a lot of times those programs, all it really is a few people helping and a lot of people giving money, thinking, I'm doing my part. He said, that isn't exactly what he's talking about. Giving money to do and help things isn't bad, but he's saying, you might not in that program, you might come across somebody who's in need, who's not in some kind of program. Your nature needs to be, you come across somebody who needs help, you're willing to help. Now, we can't always help everybody, can we? Lots of us are not in positions to always help people. Even the apostles found themselves in that situation at times. You know, a beggar on the side of the road, Peter and John, by the way, in Acts chapter 3. Like, well, I don't have any money for you, but what I do have, I'll give to you. And he healed him. Healed his legs, healed his ankles, and he was jumping and running and like, I can go to work. I can actually run around and walk, because he'd never been able to walk before. But they weren't in a position to really help him. They didn't have any money to give him. But they did what they could. God's not asking us to do what we're incapable of. He's just asking us to be people who are ready to help, to have that heart, to have that attitude, the heart of a servant. Here with this verse. And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness. God may perhaps grant them repentance, leading to a knowledge of the truth, and they may come to their senses and escape from the snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will. Notice what he's telling him. He's writing to Timothy. He says, listen, If you want to be a servant of the Lord, we don't want to be argumentative people. Now, for some of us, that's probably easy. We like that, right? There are some people, like, well, man, you're just kind of getting at my very nature. That's true. God teaches all of us, sometimes out of our nature, to be like Him. And He says, we need to be quiet, gentle servants, willing to help people, willing to teach people, willing to endure the slings and arrows and evil of people, hoping, and be gentle with them all during that time, so that hopefully some of them can find God. That's what He's asked of us, His servants, to take on that part of Jesus. I'll look at some more in coming weeks.